Emily Carter had never imagined that a simple Tuesday evening could feel so long. She stood in her small apartment in Portland, Oregon, staring at the quiet space the way someone stares at a road without traffic, unsure whether to feel peaceful or trapped. The room was neat, almost too neat. It's the kind of place shaped by someone who spent more time trying not to think about things rather than enjoy her surroundings. A candle burned on the counter, soft vanilla scent drifting through the air. But even that warm smell felt distant, unable to cover the quiet ache in her chest. She had grown used to silence after months of living alone. Yet the silence still surprised her at random moments, especially when the day had been long and her thoughts too heavy. She told herself she didn't mind being alone, as she needed space to rebuild her life after a breakup that had left her unsure of her worth. But deep down, she knew loneliness wasn't just something she felt. It had become a shadow that followed her around. Some evenings she could ignore it. Tonight she couldn't. She made tea even though she didn't really want it. Simply because doing something, anything, made the apartment feel less like a museum of old feelings. She turned on the lamp by the couch, letting the soft light spill onto the carpet, then sat down with a sigh. She glanced at her phone, thinking of calling a friend. But she knew they all had their routines, their families, their own stories to deal with. She didn't want to interrupt anyone. She didn't want to sound like she needed help. She had always been the strong one in her group, the one who listened, the one who solved problems. But lately, she felt like she was the one drifting, quietly wishing someone would knock on her door and remind her that she wasn't as alone as she feared. Just as she set her phone down, a sound cut through the room, a quick, gentle knock. Emily froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heartbeat jumped, soft but noticeable. For a moment she wondered if it was a mistake, maybe a neighbor who hit the wrong door. But the knock came again, slightly firmer. And something inside her chest shifted with a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. She walked slowly to the door, her fingers brushing her hair into place without thinking. She didn't know why she suddenly felt alert, almost awake after an entire day of moving through life on autopilot. But when she opened the door, the hallway light spilled onto a face she hadn't seen in years, yet recognized instantly. Daniel Hayes. Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel, the quiet, thoughtful guy she had known in college. It's the one who always helped her carry books across the campus. It's the one who somehow made late-night study sessions feel lighter just by being there. He was standing at her door as if time had folded back in on itself. He looked older, of course. They both were, but he carried the same calm presence she remembered. His eyes still held that softness that made people feel safe around him. But tonight she noticed something else too. Something she didn't remember seeing before. A tiredness, an unspoken weight behind his eyes. Emily. His voice sounded a little unsure, as if he wasn't entirely convinced she would open the door. Or maybe as if he wasn't convinced he should have come in the first place. He gave a small, strained smile. "Hi. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." For a second, Emily didn't speak. She simply stared, trying to understand how someone from a part of her life she thought was long gone could appear on her doorstep on a night she felt so lonely. But then her voice finally returned, soft and surprised. "Daniel, oh my God. I haven't seen you in so long. What are you doing here?" He let out a breath that sounded like relief. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. "I know this is unexpected. I just needed someone I trusted." His words struck her deeply, not because they were dramatic, but because they were sincere. Sincerity was something she had missed without realizing it. For so long, she had been surrounded by polite conversations, social media connections, quick texts, but no genuine moments. And now here he was, someone who had been real to her years ago. Someone who had shared quiet jokes and long nights of studying and simple, unspoken friendship. Seeing him brought back a version of herself she had forgotten existed. She stepped aside, her voice gentle. "Come in." Daniel nodded, stepping inside with visible hesitation, as if he wasn't sure he deserved to be there. Emily closed the door behind him, and for the first time in months, her apartment felt different, warmer, quieter, in a comforting way, almost alive. Daniel looked around slowly. "Your place is nice," he said, but his voice had that distracted tone of someone whose mind was elsewhere. He stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly tense, like someone trying to hold himself together. Emily walked toward the living room and motioned for him to sit. "You look tired," she said carefully, not wanting to push but unable to ignore what she saw. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor for a moment before lifting his eyes to hers. "I moved back to Portland a month ago," he said, his words quick and slightly uneven. "Chicago wasn't working out. Work was stressful, everything felt off. I kept telling myself it was fine, but today I couldn't pretend anymore." Emily felt an ache of empathy rise in her chest. That feeling, the weight of trying to look okay when you weren't? She understood that more than she wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That sounds really hard." He shrugged lightly, trying to brush it off, but clearly not succeeding. "I just felt like I needed somewhere familiar. Somewhere safe, I guess. And your name was the first one that came to mind." Her heart tightened unexpectedly. She never thought anyone would see her that way. Especially not someone she once admired quietly, someone whose presence used to make her feel understood even when nothing was said out loud. She sat across from him, her voice warm. "I'm glad you came. You don't have to explain everything right now. Just breathe for a moment." Daniel let out a slow breath, like someone finally lowering a weight they had carried too long. The tension on his face softened slightly. For a few seconds, they simply sat together in a comfortable silence, a silence that didn't feel empty this time, but shared. After a while, he spoke again. "You always had this way of making spaces feel calm," he said gently. "Even back in college. I didn't realize how much I missed that until today." Emily felt warmth spread through her, unexpected and almost fragile. She had spent months feeling like she barely made a difference in her own life. Hearing those words felt like someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed up for too long. "I'm glad I can still do that," she said, her smile small but real. "You don't have to pretend with me, Daniel. Not here." He looked at her with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something she couldn't name yet. She noticed the small lines near his eyes, the way his hair felt slightly messier than before, the exhaustion he tried to hide. She wondered what had really happened in Chicago, what pain he wasn't saying out loud. But she didn't push. She knew better than to force someone to spill every wound the second they walked in. Daniel shifted slightly, clearing his throat as if preparing to say something more important. "Emily, there's actually another reason I came tonight," he said, his tone lower now, almost careful. Her heart picked up speed. "What is it?" He hesitated. A long, meaningful pause filled the room. His gaze dropped for a moment before he looked back at her with a seriousness she hadn't expected. "I should have told you something years ago," he whispered. "Back when we were still in college. But before he could finish, his phone suddenly vibrated loudly on the table, breaking the moment like glass. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, frustration passing across his face. He didn't answer the call, but whatever he had been about to say slipped away, at least for now. Emily watched him, her chest tight with questions. She wanted to ask what he meant, what he had been holding on to all these years, why he had come to her specifically on a night when she felt her loneliest. But she stayed quiet. Sensing he wasn't ready to reveal everything yet, Daniel opened his eyes and exhaled softly, giving her a faint, tired smile. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's been a long day." Emily nodded, her voice gentle. "It's okay. You can tell me when you're ready." He looked at her with gratitude and something unspoken, a quiet hope. Maybe, or a need to hold on to the only calm place he had found in months. And in that moment, as the candle flickered and the room settled into a softer kind of quiet, Emily realized something. Her loneliness had shifted the moment he walked through her door. She didn't know what he was hiding, what he had come back to say. But for the first time in a long time, the silence in her apartment didn't feel heavy. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't expected. Something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but something she wanted to explore. Because sometimes life doesn't change slowly. Sometimes it changes the moment the right person walks in. And Daniel Hayes had walked in exactly when she needed him, even if she didn't know it until now. Emily Carter sat across from Daniel Hayes, her hands resting on her lap, feeling an unfamiliar mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater, and the soft glow of the lamp cast warm shadows on the walls. Daniel seemed lost in thought, staring at his hands as if he could read the answers to all his unspoken worries there. Emily's chest tightened, not from fear but from curiosity and concern. She had never been particularly good at waiting, and yet, for some reason, she felt she could sit there forever, letting him gather his words, letting the moment stretch without pushing it forward. After what felt like minutes but might have been hours, Daniel lifted his eyes and met hers, and she felt a rush of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. "Emily," he began softly, voice trembling just slightly. "I know this might sound strange after all these years, but being here tonight, it feels like I can finally breathe again." The honesty in his tone made her heart ache. She had spent months pretending she was fine, pretending she didn't need someone to look at her and really see her. And here he was, not pretending at all. Not long ago, she would have smiled and nodded politely, keeping her emotions in check. But tonight was different. Tonight, her chest felt open to him as if some invisible lock had clicked. She shifted slightly in her seat, leaning forward without realizing it. "You look like you've carried a lot on your shoulders," she said gently. "Tell me, what happened?" Daniel gave a small, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Where do I even start?" Chicago was supposed to be the fresh start. New job, new apartment, new city. I told myself I could do it all alone, that I didn't need anyone. But the truth is, I realized how much I missed being seen. Not just seen, but understood. Emily nodded slowly, remembering nights in college when they had stayed up late studying together, sharing thoughts they wouldn't share with anyone else. Those nights had been comforting then, but she didn't realize how much they had shaped her, how much she had quietly depended on that presence. "I get that," she said softly. "Sometimes. You think being alone is enough, but it isn't. Sometimes it just makes the quiet louder." Daniel looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and regret. "Exactly. And I kept ignoring it, thinking I was fine. But today I finally admitted I wasn't. And I thought, maybe coming here would help. Maybe you could remind me what it's like to feel grounded again." His words weren't dramatic, they weren't over the top. They were simple and sincere, and that simplicity made them hit harder. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let herself break down in front of him. Instead, she leaned back slightly, allowing herself to take in the moment, to let the warmth of his presence seep in. "You're here now," she said quietly, "and that's what matters. You don't have to have it all figured out tonight." He smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I don't think I ever will, but having you here makes it feel possible." There was a pause, a silence filled with unspoken memories and shared history. Emily thought about all the nights she had spent alone, imagining what it would be like if someone truly understood her. If someone returned not with judgment, but with a quiet presence that made life feel less heavy. And now that someone was sitting right in front of her, "Daniel," she whispered, "it feels like no time has passed at all." He laughed softly, a low sound that carried both nostalgia and surprise. "I know. I don't know why it feels like that. I thought years would change everything, but it's like we just paused and now we're here again." Emily's heart raced. She had imagined this moment in her mind countless times, but reality was always different. And yet reality right now felt gentle and real, like stepping into a place that had been waiting for her all along. "I never realized how much I wanted to see you again until I saw you tonight," Daniel said quietly, almost afraid of how honest he sounded. Emily felt her breath catch. That simple admission, so delicate and yet so full of feeling, seemed to stretch across the room. filling the space between them with something unspoken but undeniable. She wanted to respond, to tell him that she had felt the same way, that the nights she had spent alone had been quieter because of the memory of him. But the words wouldn't come out in order. They tangled with her emotions, with the sudden realization that life sometimes gave second chances in ways she never expected. Instead, she let herself smile, soft and small, her eyes meeting his. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Really glad." Daniel's gaze softened and he leaned back slightly, exhaling in a way that seemed to release years of tension. "I don't know how long I can stay tonight," he admitted. "I didn't plan this. I just followed a feeling." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at that admission, at the simplicity and honesty of it. She realized that in many ways, they were both walking back into a space of vulnerability, a place where nothing needed to be forced, and yet everything felt important. "Then let's not worry about time," she said. "Let's just be here." Daniel nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. They sat together, not speaking for a while, letting the room's quiet hold them, letting the soft shadows and the glow of the lamp be a witness to the shift in their lives. Emily noticed the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his hands stopped fidgeting, and she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in months. It was as if his presence alone was healing the spaces she had thought were permanently empty. "Emily," Daniel said after a long pause, his voice softer now, "there's something I should have told you back then. Something I wanted to say years ago, but I didn't. I was afraid. Afraid of ruining what we had, I guess. But now, I feel like I have to tell you." Emily leaned forward slightly, heart pounding. She could sense the weight of his words, the emotion behind them. And the quiet anticipation made the air between them almost electric. "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Daniel looked at her, his eyes serious, thoughtful, and yet tender. "Back in college, I always felt more than friendship for you," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Emily's breath hitched. She had imagined many confessions over the years, wondered if he had ever thought of her that way. But hearing him say it aloud made her pulse race and her mind swirl with a mixture of surprise and relief. "I never said it then," he continued, "because I didn't want to complicate things. I didn't want to risk losing the friendship we had. But I always hoped one day we could be more." Emily's eyes softened, tears she had been holding back threatening to spill. She realized that the longing she had carried during her lonely nights wasn't entirely hers alone. He had felt it too, in his own quiet, careful way. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of connection, of understanding. "Daniel, I think I always knew," she whispered. "I felt it too, even if I didn't admit it to myself." A faint smile appeared on his lips, relief shining through the tiredness in his eyes. They didn't need to rush, didn't need to speak more, because the truth had been shared. The years of silence, of missed opportunities, suddenly felt like a story paused, waiting for this very moment to resume. They sat close, side by side, the distance between them closing without words, letting the quiet intimacy speak for them. Outside, the night stretched quietly, and the city hummed gently in the distance. Inside, the small apartment felt alive, filled with warmth, understanding, and a budding hope neither of them could fully explain. Daniel looked at Emily once more, softly brushing a strand of hair from her face. And she felt the familiar comfort of being seen, truly seen. The kind of comfort that makes the world feel less heavy, that makes lonely nights more bearable, that reminds you that life sometimes brings the right person back at the right time. Emily smiled, letting herself lean into the moment, her heart light but racing, her mind full of possibilities. And she knew, without doubt, that this night marked the beginning of a chapter they had both been waiting for. A chapter of closeness, understanding, and a connection deeper than either had expected. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel alone. Daniel had walked in, and with him came the gentle, quiet promise that life could feel full again, that hearts could find their way back to each other, and that sometimes The right person appears at the exact moment you need them most. And as the candle flickered and the room settled into a calm glow, both of them realized that this was only the start of something neither time nor distance could undo. They didn't speak because they didn't have to. The quiet understanding between them said more than words ever could. And in that moment, Emily Carter and Daniel Hayes felt the unspoken truth that sometimes life changes not in dramatic events, but in quiet moments of courage, honesty, and the courage to walk back into someone's life and into their own heart.